Hello, this is Doug Warren, and I'll be presenting my proposal for a research study involving the Hispanic White Achievement Gap in academic writing. The achievement gap is a trend that has been noticed where minority students traditionally, as a whole, as a group, perform about 10% lower, in the 10% range depending on the subject, 10% lower than white students and students of Asian heritage on standardized tests and assessments. This has been brought to light in recent years by the No Child Left Behind Act, because part of the act is trying to get schools to close this achievement gap. And to do that, the act stipulates that the standardized test data must be disaggregated and made public so people can see what each ethnic group scored and low socioeconomic students compared to non-low socioeconomic students, and compare the difference. Now, what the act does is says schools must close this gap or they risk losing their federal funding. So that's why it is of extra importance and attention to school administrators at the moment. My research questions will be: to what extent does the student's familial relationships and culture affect his or her achievement in academic writing? How do schools contribute to the Hispanic White Achievement Gap in academic writing? And how do students' peers affect their academic writing performance? In framing my research, I looked at three researchers: Noguera, Contreras, and Buck. Now, Noguera addresses the problem of No Child Left Behind, putting a spotlight on the issue, but offering no solutions. When they put this out and said close the gap, they didn't say here's how you close the gap or do any studies to show the best ways to close the gap. They said close it or lose money. Now, Noguera does not believe that the cause of the achievement gap is racial at all. Instead, he believes it's caused by parental education level and experience, household income, and the strain between white teachers and their minority students, particularly white teachers having lower expectations of minority and low socioeconomic students. Now, Contreras' main area of research is the Hispanic White Achievement Gap. You'll see later on that most of the research around the achievement gap looks at black students compared to white students. Contreras focuses mainly on Hispanic, and he says that part of the problem is that Hispanic students have been ignored when it comes to policy, because the influx of Hispanic students came after Brown versus Board of Education, where laws and regulations to protect minority students were put in place, but he says that those laws and regulations mainly only looked at black students. And now that the law is set, Hispanic students have come in and there have been no changes or updates. Contreras identifies the causes of the achievement gap as the geographic location of schools, whereas in the United States, most students are assigned to the school closest to their house. And he says this causes inner city schools to have high poverty rates, high dropout rates, and be low achieving, where the suburban schools have high achieving students, have more programs, have more funding. He also says that Hispanic students are overly identified as special ed, or being told that they had 504 indicators at a higher rate than any other, even though it's not deserved. And he also says that Hispanic students and low socioeconomic students are discouraged from taking advanced placement classes, the AP classes, or even going into the advanced tracks as compared to white students. Stuart Buck rejects the notion that the racial achievement gaps caused by schools or socioeconomic factors. As far as schools go, he says that the poor inner city schools with high poverty rates actually spend more dollars per student than the wealthier suburban school districts do. And he says socioeconomic factors make no change, because if you look at minority students, the achievement gap is present and the low socioeconomic students, the middle class, and the wealthy students at the same rate. So he says that doesn't make a difference. He says what does make a difference are family traditions and peer influence. His family traditions, he goes back to the end of the Civil War and says that when the slaves were freed and they sent their children to school, they had no idea, the parents had no idea how to support their students because they had never been to school themselves. Then when those children grew up and had kids of their own, since they never saw their parents model behavior at home to help them at school, they didn't know how to model that behavior for their children, so they didn't. And this is continued generationally. I know that this is dealing with Hispanic students, but a lot of my study is. But if you look at Texas, when the Hispanic population started coming in, and the schooling, the treatment that those children received at school and the schooling they received, you'll see some similarities and some relation. And again, these parents now, they didn't know how to support their students at home, so their students never saw that modeled, and it's continued till today. And his other cause is peer influence. He says that minority students, when they get together, often ridicule the students who do well in school or want to do well in school, and say that they're trying to act too white. And so these students, in order to be accepted by their peers and not appear to be acting white, underperform in school intentionally. And his evidence for that is pointing out Asian American students who, even the ones who have no support at home, or come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, or have any of the other factors for the achievement gap, don't fall into the achievement gap because he says that their peers are pressuring them to do better, so they exceed to be on the same level as their peers and friends. So I'm framing my research around the idea of family, schools, and peers to see which one, or all of them, have influences towards the achievement gap. And I will be basing it in postmodern critical theory. So I will be looking at the historical influences, the cultural influences, and how the political climate and the politics involved has affected those things. The participants I will use in my study will be recent graduates of Plainview High School and English 1 and English 2 teachers from the same school. And the methods I'll be using are interviews, observations, and test data collection. So for the interviews, I will look at all three of the factors: school, family, and home, and ask the students their experiences with them and their feelings on the matter. Classroom observations will be done in English 1 and English 2 classrooms, and I will look at what writing instruction is given, how the students and teachers interact with each other, if there is a difference in the interaction between a white teacher and Hispanic student, and a white teacher and a white student, by the same Hispanic teacher, white student, Hispanic teacher, Hispanic student. The interactions are the same. Also, do the students appear to be paying attention to the instruction? What techniques are given to them to improve their writing, and see if the students use this in their own writing. Also, I'll look at the writing prompts and what they're asked to write about to see if there are cultural biases that may help white students or give a benefit to them over minority students. Also, I'll look at the test data that has been collected for these students from the STAR test, that's the state assessment in Texas, and looking at where different students scored based on the different subpopulations that we're looking at. Now, I will say the test data from this school will only be considering Hispanic students and white students, because all the other ethnic groups have too small of a number to show up in the data, because if we presented that data publicly, you'd probably be able to figure out which students scored what. For ethical considerations, Participant selection will be students who've graduated 2017 or earlier, because if we have other students in that study, then those will be the students who I have taught and prepared for the STAR writing test, either when they're in 4th grade and I taught elementary school, or when they're in 10th grade. So it's going to be only students graduated 2017 or above, because I think having been their teacher, that might influence their answers, and I wouldn't be able to see honestly how they really felt about their writing experience. Interviews will be conducted at Plainview High School in conference rooms, so it'll feel like a neutral location. Observations will be done with permission of teachers, administrators, and, since these involve minor students, parental consent for me to be in there. Everything will be kept confidential. I will use pseudonyms in place of all the real names. Data will be collected, electronic data will be collected and stored on my personal computer with password protection, in programs with password protection, and all data will be deleted and erased once the study is finalized and published. The first significance of the study is schools really are losing funding based on their test scores. And if we can find causes of the scores and solutions to the problem, schools can continue to receive their federal funding. Also, college readiness for the students. Talking to former students I've had who've graduated, who've done poorly in college, or maybe even are no longer in college, have dropped out, they talked about not keeping up with the writing, not knowing what to do when the professors assigned assignments. So if we have all students writing at a high academic level, that will help them once they get to college. Also, it will help school culture. If we find out that part of the problem is how teachers interact with students, or how the assignments they give are alienating the students, if we can eliminate those problems, we'll have a stronger school environment. The same thing, if we find out that it is peer influence that is hurting students academically, we could change the culture of the school, try to change the culture of the school to where we don't have those problems anymore. Thank you all for listening to this and following along with me. I hope you have a great rest of the day.